It was morning in the mist-specked Picos de Europa mountains of northern Spain on October 12, 2019, when two young cavers, Javier Mena and Nuria Solé, hiked toward the mouth of the Niebla Shaft. It was 3 degrees. Their breath was visible in the air. Because the contents were always so consistent, a static rope, a descender, helmet, headlamp, they often carried lighter packs than those to which they should have been accustomed. Nothing extra, nothing unnecessary. His bootfalls rang through the cold stone, radiated across heaven's silent morn like ripples. Niebla is the Spanish word for fog, and that day it didn't disappoint. He described a thick white veil over the valley that blotted out all trace of the mountain. At the first anchor, when Javier fixed it, Nuria's fingers were already numb from inside her gloves. The cold was seeping through the material, and her skin clung to the moist stone like a second layer. Everything was silent. The silence itself was echoic. Through the shaft mouth, beveling fog slid in like a curtain. Niebla was tight and steep, more tunnel than cave. The walls were slimy. The floor was uneven. Each step risked a slip. Javier held his headlamp up high, the beam overturning upon the slick stone.
Claustrophobia speedrun, anyone?
The darkness in front seemed alive, pulsing, watching. The air was thick and oppressive, moist and choking. It was the only sound their breathing, shallow, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Stone cold pulsed with each beat of his heart. The first narrow passage inside closed in around them. Their boots stuck and dragged in the goopy mud with each stride. The walls brushed their shoulders. There was a tension that ran through the body to its bones. There was only the dark beyond the arc of headlamp light, a black so profound that everything was simply within it. On their breath, too, there was reiteration. Each breath pressed the form of fear. The fog hid the void below. Up front lay this fossilized shaft. It was the main drop. The curves of the rock gave an illusion of distance, and even of depth. Javier tied off the rope around a limestone outcropping, double-checked the gear, and began to rappel. All was well for the first few meters. The rope rode smoothly, and the angle felt good. But then the wall sloped in. The rope began to chafe, wet through.
Well, look at that. Our hero Javier just found out what happens when physics meets bad planning. Heh heh. See? When your rope starts sizzling like a barbecue line, that's usually a hint to stop. But no, he's committed. The wall's hugging him back. Heh heh. I mean, how romantic. Heh. Nothing says adventure like third-degree burns on your palms. You know, I like a good challenge. Like trying to open a bag of chips without tearing the whole thing. But this is nature's way of handing out IQ tests. And spoiler alert, the cave's winning. Every single time. But hey, at least it's warm down there. From all the friction. Bravo, Javier. You didn't just descend, you slow-cooked your courage.
There was a soft hiss which grew into a dry, metallic buzz. The heat built fast. It was stripping all the way to the skin through the gloves. They were frictionless, those. The rope thrummed on the stone. The abseil hung suspended. Javier's breathing quickened. His heart was pounding and his throat so hot and dry. The rope locked solid. Pain seared through his palms. There was no movement in the air above him. Inside, the stone felt hollow, deep, veiled, without end. Time stretched. Breath shortened. A silent panic crawled through his veins. Nuria saw the tension above her shift. Too close to the wall, the rope was, well, it had baby trapped. She clipped her headlamp onto the lip, pulled up, and just searched for a drier hold. She rigged a little diversion, just with a short sling, which is all they had. It was mere centimeters of difference, but it sent everything spinning. The stress changed, the tension ebbed, the rope breathed again. The tension lifted from below, Javier felt. He felt the burn but regained control of his hands. He hit pause, took a deep breath. The stillness of the cave was audible again. Cold air cut into his lungs. He flexed his fingers. The charred skin pulled taut. He knew it was time to stop. To go any further would not have been bravery. It would have been foolishness. It was then that the cave proved its reality. Niebla was not a place of discovery. It was an experiment. There was a cost to every move, a consequence to every angle. Javier pulled himself up. His palms ached and his muscles shook. Every meter up was a battle between body and will. The air chilled, the damp bit harder. Nuria maintained her balance, never looking down. Between them throbbed the heart of the cave, pulse of rock, fear, and survival. After Javier had made it to the surface, he took off his gloves. Over the palms, red burn lines laced through flesh. The cold was seeping into the wound, a slow but deep ache. The lesson was the mark on his hands, the line between skill and mishap, life and loss. They didn't speak. They didn't need to.
Well, look at that. Our boy Javier made it back to daylight. Congratulations. Heh, comma, man. You survived gravity's little workshop. And what's the prize? A pair of roasted palms straight from the School of Hard Rocks. You see, people talk about scars like they're trophies. But this one's a receipt. Proof that sometimes experience doesn't come from winning. It comes from not dying. That line between skill and mishap, that's the real education. The cave doesn't hand out diplomas, it hands out consequences. And Javier just graduated with honors in Pain Management 101.
The cave had already spoken all. A week afterwards, they were back in the valley. The atmosphere was lighter, the fog lower. From far below could be heard the distant laughter of children. That was all, faint and blurry with distance, but full of life. They made their way back, step by laborious step. He studied the angle of the rope before setting it. Nuria was sliding the lamp down the wall. The reflection games were being played again, but not this time. They weren't having it. They knew the language of shadow. The new line was out, dry and straight. On a brief test rappel, the rope fed out smoothly.
Oh, look who's back. Guess the first lesson wasn't painful enough, huh? Some people just love giving the cave a second chance.
Their hands remained steady. Their breathing took them evenly. The cave was as it had always been. They were not. And it was no longer silence pushing back. It simply existed. The temperature had also fallen by the afternoon. Fingers grew numb and breath became vapor. Nuria made a cup of her hands and blew into them. Javier felt the tremble in his aching muscles. But this time, the shaking was not of fear, but of power. They climbed carefully upward. At the opening, moisture had settled into a thin layer on the stones. The air was biting, but it felt free. At long last, as they came down the valley, a tiny light showed in a far window. Small, but real. After hours of darkness, it was enough to count as hope. In every man, a window. As it shuts, the breath becomes shallow. When it opens, it deepens. The cave had not taught them hope, only the price it could command. That night, Javier jotted down 2 words in his notebook: friction plate. He drew a line below it and wrote there, line angle. A tiny error, a large lesson.
You know, people always say light means hope. Cute idea. But out here, that little window light, that's not hope, and that's a receipt. A receipt for every stupid decision that didn't kill you. Javier thinks he found clarity, writing down friction plate like it's some sacred revelation. Heh heh. Buddy, that's not enlightenment, and that's engineering, but hey, I get it. Spend enough time in the dark, and even a tiny bulb looks like the sun. Heh heh.
The cave wasn't to suck them in, but to hold back their excesses. And all limits can be exceeded, if the judgment is correct. Mountain slopes emerged from the fog by morning. The Niebla Shaft was there as it always had been, gray, silent, and unvarying. Javier and Nuria stopped at the door. The wind swept through the stone, humming low and cold. That hum was not fear. It was memory. Fear hadn't disappeared. It had just found its home. It wasn't an enemy anymore. It was a familiar friend. Dark was still dark, but light within them had increased. The cave was not an enemy. It was a revenant. Each narrow passage spoke of patience, each rough surface of understanding, each burn of endurance.
Ah, enlightenment. That's when you stop fighting the cave and start paying rent to it. Heh heh.
But this time, that silence wasn't terrifying. It was significant. Since the cave had never been an enemy. Sometimes you just trip into your own shadow. And running away from them isn't about seeking light. It's about seeking balance in the dark. Survival is not made of the stuff of heroism, but out of tiny, proper decisions. Sometimes the boldest thing someone can utter is, "That's enough for today." And that day, Niebla taught two people not the language of darkness, but what a hope is. And that reverberation is still inside the stone.
Well, well, look who finally made it out. Heh heh. You call it survival. I call it a payment plan. You didn't conquer the dark. You just learned how to rent space in it. Heh heh. That balance you're proud of, it's just your shadow agreeing not to eat you today.